I was sitting quietly at the table next to my 7-year-old grandson at my son's second wedding. Suddenly, the boy grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave right now." I asked him, "What's wrong?" He trembled and replied, "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" I slowly lowered my gaze and froze. I took my grandson's hand, and we got up in silence. I was sitting in the middle of the wedding hall, a grand conservatory aglow with fairy lights, right next to my little grandson, the boy I love more than life itself. Today was the wedding of my son Julian to his second wife, Serafina. My little boy Noah was busy sailing his small, handcrafted wooden boat back and forth across the immaculate linen tablecloth. His clear eyes seemed immersed in a world of his own, where the noise of the adults around him didn't exist. I looked at him, and my heart softened. I carefully straightened the tiny vest over his shirt, a gesture as gentle as if I were caressing the memory of his mother, Amelia, whose every tender smile I still remember as if it were yesterday. The soft melody of a string trio filled the room, blending with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of champagne flutes. The conservatory was decorated with impressive elegance, with arrangements of pristine white orchids on every table and the lights reflected on the gleaming glassware. I looked up, searching for Julian. He was busy going from table to table, toasting to thank the guests with a radiant smile that seemed to want to hide the emptiness I knew he still carried in his heart since Amelia left. In the distance, Serafina, my son's new wife, stunning in her silk wedding dress, posed for photos with her friends. Her smile was perfect, without a single cloud, as if the whole world belonged to her. I looked at her and felt something strange in my chest, a weird sensation. But I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. Waiters moved gracefully between the tables, serving more champagne, clearing empty plates, and arranging the napkins. An elderly couple sitting at our table turned to me with a kind smile. "How fast Noah is growing up. How old is he now, Eleanor?" I smiled and replied in a soft voice, "He just turned 7. Time flies." Then I turned to cut a small piece of bread to give to Noah. The boy looked up, his eyes shining with gratitude. But he immediately lowered his head again and continued sailing his toy boat as if only that toy was the place where he felt safe. Suddenly, Noah stopped. His little hands stopped moving the boat, and his round eyes looked at me with a seriousness that was not normal for him. I was a little startled. A bad feeling ran through my body. He grabbed my hand tightly. His little fingers were ice cold. In an urgent voice, he whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave, right now." His voice trembled as if he were holding back a fear he couldn't explain. My heart raced. I leaned over him and put a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong, my boy? Tell me what it is." Noah shuddered, pressing his lips together, and then he whispered so softly that I had to lean my ear closer to hear him. "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold knife that went through my chest. A terrible anguish began to grow inside me, making it hard to breathe. I tried to stay calm and stroked his hair, but his gaze, the panicked look of a boy of just 7, prevented me from ignoring it. "It's okay, my love. Let your grandma look," I said, trying to make my voice sound calm to soothe him, although I felt my own heart was pounding. Carefully, I lifted the edge of the white tablecloth and looked into the dark space under the table, where the wooden legs of the chairs and Noah's little shoes were swinging. And then I saw it. A small piece of paper, folded in 4, lying there, right next to Noah's chair. It was so small that it was almost lost in the darkness, but its presence chilled my blood. Noah huddled against me, his little hand gripping my arm as if seeking refuge. I felt his agitated breathing. Every tremor seemed to tell me that something was very wrong. I crouched down completely, and with a trembling hand I picked up the paper. The people around us were still laughing and toasting, but at that instant my entire world shrank until it was just me, Noah, and that damned paper in my hand. I unfolded it. The dim fairy lights on the table were enough to read the scribbled words. Table 8, add crushed walnuts to the child's ice cream. A few words, but they were like a direct punch to my heart. I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins and the air get stuck in my chest. Noah is severely allergic to walnuts, something my whole family knows perfectly well. A single piece would be enough to put his life in danger. Who could have written this? Who could be so cruel? Right on my son's wedding day. I squeezed Noah's hand, feeling his little fingers tremble in mine. I stood up abruptly, not caring about the surprised looks from the people around me. The elderly couple nearby stopped talking and looked at me with concern. I hugged Noah with all my strength as if I feared he would vanish if I let him go. The laughter and music continued, but for me, everything had become a heavy, suffocating silence. Memories of other times flooded my mind, taking me out of that gleaming wedding hall and back to the years when our family was whole. I once thought my son's home would always be filled with laughter. But life, like a sudden gust of wind, extinguished that flame of happiness, leaving me with scars that would never heal. I remember Amelia, my first daughter-in-law, like I remember the morning sunlight streaming through the window at dawn. Her smile was tender and warm. She always made me feel like I was in the arms of a true daughter. Amelia never raised her voice, never did anything that worried me. She was one of those people who just by looking at them made you feel at peace. I still remember those very windy afternoons in the coastal town in Maine where I would arrive at Julian and Amelia's little cottage. The laughter of Noah, who had just started to walk, echoed in the backyard as he chased a colorful rubber ball. Amelia would be on the porch with a basket of freshly picked berries, smiling as she watched her son. "Mom, Eleanor, try the chowder I made. See what you think," she would often say to me, her voice full of pride as she placed the warm bowl in front of me. I would sit there eating and talking with her about simple things while Noah crawled on the floor clinging to an old wooden toy. But the most beautiful and also the most painful memory is the night Noah became very sick. He had a very high fever. His little body burned and his eyes could barely open, with no strength left even to cry. Amelia held him while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "Mom, Eleanor, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat next to her, taking turns to place damp cloths on his forehead, trying to calm her. "Don't worry, honey. The boy is strong. He's going to be okay." But inside, the worry weighed on me like a stone. I stayed up with Amelia until dawn, when the first rays of sun appeared, and Noah's fever finally broke and he fell asleep in his mother's arms. Amelia turned to me, her eyes red but with a faint smile. "Thank you, Mom. Without you, I don't know what I would have done at that moment." I just took her hand and squeezed it tightly, as if I wanted to tell her that I would always be there for her and for Noah. I thought that this little family would be happy forever, like a song that never ends. But then, one fateful afternoon, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The cold voice of a doctor came through the line. "Mrs. Vance, we regret to inform you that there has been a sudden event." I don't remember how I finished hearing the sentence. I just know that my hands were shaking so much that I dropped a plate on the floor and it shattered. Amelia was gone in an instant, from a sudden brain aneurysm. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling the world crumble in front of me. Amelia's funeral was on a day of torrential rain. The drops fell nonstop, as if the sky was also crying for her. Noah, who was only 4 years old then, was in my arms, confused, looking at everyone with his innocent eyes, not understanding what was happening. "Grandma, where's my mommy?" he asked in his little voice. I hugged him tightly, swallowing my tears, and whispered, "Your mommy is in a very beautiful place, my love." But inside, I felt shattered. Julian, my son, a talented composer, collapsed in front of the coffin, his shoulders shaking, and he couldn't say a word. I knew he was trying to be strong, but his gaze was empty, as if a part of his soul had gone with Amelia. After that tragedy, Julian changed completely. He buried himself in his music. He would leave for his studio very early and wouldn't return until Noah was already asleep. I understood that he was running away, trying to fill that immense void in his heart with endless melodies. But Noah, my poor boy, suffered the most. He started talking less. His gaze was often sad, as if he was waiting for a miracle that would bring his mother back. I became his only support. I took him to school every morning and sat by his bed every night to rock him. "Grandma, tell me a story about my mommy," he would often ask me. and I would tell them to him in a choked voice, talking about the times Amelia sang to him to sleep, how she cut his fruit into little pieces to make him his favorite dessert. Each story was an attempt to keep Amelia's image alive in Noah's mind and in my heart. Grace, my close friend's daughter, whom I'd known since she was a baby, also became an essential part of those days. With her warm heart and skilled hands, she would come to the house often, bringing coloring books or cookies she had baked herself. Grace loved Noah as if he were her own little brother. She would carry him, teach him to read, or sit for hours with him at the table to help him with his clumsy drawings. "Look, Noah, your house turned out prettier than mine," she would say, laughing in her voice as clear as a bell. But sometimes I would catch Grace looking at Julian when he entered the house in silence after a long day of work. It was a deep look that contained something more than a simple sibling affection. I saw it, but I decided not to say anything. Maybe I was afraid that if I brought up the subject, I would break the fragile stability of what was left of our family. Julian's house slowly became devoid of laughter, but thanks to Grace and Noah, the family flame remained lit, even if it was weak. I did everything possible to keep that flame from going out, but in the depths of my heart, I knew that both Julian and I lived with wounds that had never healed. Every time I saw Noah sleeping, I saw Amelia's features on his little face, and my heart would ache again. The memory of that afternoon is still as clear in my mind as if time had not passed. I was sitting in my small living room listening to the seagulls singing in the yard, with a heart full of mixed feelings. It was the first time my son Julian was bringing Serafina home to introduce her. I tried to open my heart. I tried to see this young woman through the eyes of a mother who wants her son to find happiness again after so much pain. But deep down, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease like a cold wind that made me shiver. That afternoon, Julian arrived later than usual. I was in the kitchen, preparing the clam chowder that Noah loves so much, when I heard the door open. Julian came in with a strange glow on his face. His eyes lit up as they were in his youth when he used to talk about Amelia with a passion he couldn't hide. "Mom," he said in a choked voice, leaning against the doorframe, "I want you to meet someone." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, feeling a bit of nervousness. "Someone special?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Julian smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "Yes, you're going to like her very much," he said, full of confidence. I nodded. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to hide the worry that was starting to grow in me. After Amelia, I wasn't sure anyone could fill the void she left, not only for Julian, but also for Noah and for me. That night, Serafina appeared. She entered my house in an elegant navy blue dress, her hair perfectly styled in waves that framed her face, and her lips painted a soft red that curved into a smile. That smile, I must admit, was charming, as if she had rehearsed it to please anyone. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Vance," she said in a sweet voice, bowing her head slightly. I returned her smile, invited her in, and served her a cup of hot, aromatic tea. "Your house is so cozy," Serafina said, as her eyes scanned the family photos hanging on the wall where there was one of Amelia hugging a very tiny Noah. I nodded and thanked her, but her eyes lingered on that photo longer than I would have liked, and I wasn't sure if I liked that. Dinner went on in an atmosphere that I tried to make as friendly as possible. I placed the dishes I had prepared all afternoon on the table: clam chowder in sourdough bowls, a plate of steamed mussels, and a fresh salad with cranberries, Noah's favorite dish. Julian sat next to Serafina, his eyes never leaving her. His happiness was visible in every gesture. "Mom, Serafina is a curator at a major art gallery in Boston. She's brilliant at what she does," he said, his voice full of pride. Serafina smiled. She served me a portion of salad with a delicate but calculated movement. "Mrs. Vance, this is delicious. You have to teach me how to make it," she said, giving me a friendly look. I smiled and responded politely, but a small part of me remained uneasy. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she laughed, that made me feel like I was watching a very well-staged play. Noah, my grandson, was sitting at the head of the table, strangely quiet. He, who normally wouldn't stop talking about school, that night just picked at his food without lifting his head once. I noticed that he was avoiding Serafina's gaze, as if he was trying to hide in a safe corner. Serafina leaned over, took a fancy chocolate bar from her purse, and placed it in front of Noah with a radiant smile. "This is for you." "It's very good, Noah," she said, in a voice as sweet as if she were trying to win him over. But Noah remained still, his little hands gripping his silverware, and then he simply turned his face away without touching the chocolate. I saw a flash of fear in his eyes and felt as if my heart would shrink. Julian frowned, about to scold his son. "Noah, what's wrong with you? Serafina is giving you some candy." I quickly intervened. "It's nothing. He's probably a little tired. Leave him be, son." Julian sighed, but didn't say anything else, and turned to serve Serafina more wine, as if he wanted to lighten the mood. Grace was also at dinner. She sat across from me, eating in silence, but I noticed how her gaze darkened when Serafina took Julian's hand under the table. Grace has always been a very sensitive girl, and I know she loves Julian like a brother, but sometimes I wonder if that feeling isn't deeper. When Serafina took Julian's hand, Grace's hand stopped over her glass, and I saw her fingers tighten a little. She didn't say anything. She just lowered her head and continued eating. But that silence was heavier than any words. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to understand what was making her sad, but I knew it wasn't the right time. After dinner, Serafina insisted on washing the dishes, even though I refused several times. "Mrs. Vance, you rest," she said with overflowing enthusiasm. I reluctantly agreed and watched her go into the kitchen, roll up her sleeves, and hum a cheerful tune while she cleaned. I must admit that she did everything impeccably. The dishes were neatly stacked and the sink was sparkling. For a moment I thought, this girl seems very caring. But then, when I went out into the living room, I saw Noah sitting, coloring with his little hands clutching a crayon. Serafina approached and sat down next to him, praising him. "You draw so well, Noah. What is it? Let me see." But Noah immediately let go of the pencil and leaned back with an expression of distrust, as if she were a threat. Serafina glanced at me and quickly forced a smile, as if to cover up the awkward moment. "What a shy boy," she said in the same sweet voice. But I saw something strange flash in her eyes. Julian, meanwhile, didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. He was busy serving more wine, telling funny anecdotes from his work, and laughing loudly every time Serafina told a joke. The introduction ended with my son completely satisfied, seeing Serafina off at the door with his eyes fixed on her as if there was no one else in the world. I stood there watching them walk away with a strange feeling in my heart, as if something wasn't quite right. Time passed, and Serafina gradually became a part of our lives. One weekend morning, with the bright Maine sun flooding the living room through the windows, I was knitting a scarf when Serafina appeared, smiling from ear to ear. "Mrs. Vance, I want to take Noah to the museum today. Is that okay?" she asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. I looked at Noah, who was on the floor playing with his wooden blocks, his face expressionless. "Of course, I'm sure he'd love it," I replied, forcing a smile. Even though I felt a little doubt inside, Julian had gone to his studio and I thought maybe a little fresh air would do Noah good. Serafina took Noah's hand and led him toward the door while I watched them go with a strange heaviness in my heart. When they returned, Serafina came in with a triumphant smile. He had so much fun. He wouldn't stop looking at the dinosaur bones, and he even asked for another ice cream, she recounted, her voice full of excitement. But when I looked at Noah, I saw that his jacket was torn near the shoulder, with some dried mud stains on the blue fabric that I had ironed myself that morning. He was silent with his toy boat in his hand, without saying a word about his outing. "Did you have fun, my boy?" I asked, crouching down to stroke his hair. He just nodded slightly, looking away. I wanted to ask him more, to know why he was so quiet, but Serafina intervened with her always sweet voice. "I already told you, Mrs. Vance." He loved it. I nodded, but inside me, a small piece of the puzzle of doubt began to form. On another occasion, while Julian was at work, Serafina showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen preparing stew for lunch when I heard her talking to Noah in the living room. At first, her voice was soft, but suddenly I heard a harsh phrase. "Stay still, Noah. Don't make a mess. You're a big boy now, but you still act like a baby." I stopped dead in my tracks, my hands still over the onion I was chopping, and a chill ran through my body. I came out of the kitchen, and instantly Serafina changed her tone, becoming as sweet as if nothing had happened. "Our Noah is so clever. Look at the tall tower he built," she said, pointing to the wooden blocks the boy was playing with a radiant smile. But Noah just pressed his lips together and looked at me as if asking for help. I tried to smile and said, "Yes, he's very skilled." But inside, The unease was starting to grow, like a small thorn digging into my heart. I tried to calm myself. Surely she's not used to children. Anyone is a bit clumsy at first. Noah's 7th birthday is a memory I will never forget. Grace, my dear friend's daughter, spent all morning baking a carrot cake, Noah's favorite. When she arrived with the cake and placed it on the table with its candles lit, Noah shouted with joy. His eyes lit up for the first time in months. "Aunt Grace, this is my favorite cake," he exclaimed, running to hug her. She smiled, stroked his hair, and told him tenderly, "I made it for you, my love. Eat a lot." I watched them with a warm heart, feeling that the family flame was rekindled. Serafina was also there, but she only clapped in a forced way, standing in a corner with a weary smile. Her only gift for Noah was an indifferent pat on the shoulder and a "happy birthday, champ." I saw how Noah shrank a little, avoiding her gaze, and my heart ached again. I wanted to say something, but I stayed quiet, telling myself not to get too involved. Another time, Julian took Serafina and Noah to the farmer's market. I stayed home, but when they returned, I heard Serafina complaining in an irritated tone. "Noah dropped a whole basket of apples at the checkout, and I had to pay for it. What a clumsy boy." Julian frowned and turned to scold his son. "Noah, you're a big boy now. You have to be more careful." I saw Noah lower his head with his hands intertwined, and his eyes sought mine as if asking for help. I quickly approached and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, my boy. It was just some apples." But inside, I couldn't stop wondering why Serafina got so angry so easily with a child. Why couldn't she be as gentle as Amelia had been? One afternoon, when I went to pick up Noah from school, his teacher took me aside and said, in a low but concerned voice, "Mrs. Vance, lately Noah has been talking less and seems very withdrawn. Is something happening at home?" I froze, but I tried to downplay it. "I'm sure it's just the changes, Mrs. Davis. Don't worry." But on the way home, Noah tugged on my blouse and said in a trembling voice, "Grandma, I don't want to go home with Miss Serafina." I stopped and knelt down to look into his clear eyes, my heart feeling squeezed. "Why do you say that, my love?" "Miss Serafina loves you," I said, but as soon as I said it, I knew I was wrong. Noah shook his head with firm determination in his gaze. "No, Grandma, she doesn't love me." I stroked his hair, trying to calm him, but inside I couldn't deny that the boy was telling the truth. Grace, who was nearby, had heard everything. She turned away in silence, but I saw how her shoulders moved slightly, as if she were holding back a sigh. All those loose pieces, all those little signs. I had seen them, but I had chosen to ignore them. And so the day of my son's wedding arrived. That afternoon, the golden sun of Maine streamed through the large windows, bathing the conservatory in a radiant light, as if wanting to celebrate my son's happy day. I was sitting at table number 8, next to my grandson, Noah, and Grace. Noah was playing with his wooden boat, whispering a soft swish, swish. I looked at him and my heart filled with tenderness. Grace, in a simple lavender dress, was sitting on the other side, leaning over from time to say something in Noah's ear with a smile as sweet as the morning sun. "Eat another little piece of bread, my boy," she said, breaking off a small piece for him. I smiled at the sight, feeling a little comfort in my heart. Although our family had gone through so much pain, the presence of Grace and Noah was always the fire that warmed my soul. Julian, my son, dressed in an elegant charcoal gray suit, was walking between the tables, toasting with relatives. His face was overflowing with happiness. His radiant smile seemed to want to erase the dark years that followed Amelia's death. I looked at him, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. I wanted to believe that he had found a new happiness, that Serafina, the dazzling bride in her silk wedding dress, would give him a new home. But every time my gaze met Serafina's, who was laughing loudly in front of the cameras, never letting go of her champagne flute, I felt a small thorn digging into my heart. Her smile was too perfect, like a carefully placed mask. The soft melody of the string trio played, blending with the lively conversations of the guests. The waiters moved discreetly, serving appetizers, crispy crackers, an aromatic cheese dip, and platters of fresh fruit elegantly decorated. I noticed that Noah only took a cracker and then carefully pushed the fruit platter away. I frowned and asked him in a low voice, "Don't you like this, my love?" The boy shook his head, looking away as if he were hiding something. I wanted to ask him more, but a close relative interrupted, saying cheerfully, "And Noah is behaving well, Eleanor. Look how big he's gotten." I smiled and replied, "He's a smart little man now." But inside, I couldn't help but worry. Noah had never refused food in such a strange way. In the distance, I saw Serafina's gaze turn to our table. The smile on her lips seemed to tighten for a second, just enough for no one to notice before she turned to continue toasting with another guest. I tried to dismiss my uneasiness, telling myself I was overthinking, but then everything changed in an instant. Noah, who was still playing with his toy boat, pushed it too hard and the toy rolled onto the floor. The boy quickly crouched down to pick it up, but I saw him freeze, his eyes wide, fixed on something under the table. I leaned over to ask him what was wrong when Noah pulled out a small piece of paper folded in four, with trembling hands and a pale face. He immediately clung to my hand and whispered urgently, "Grandma, let's go. Please, let's go now." My heart started pounding as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. "What's wrong, my boy?" I asked, trying to stay calm. But Noah's panicked look prevented me from doing so. Trembling, he repeated that question that chilled my blood. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold knife that paralyzed me. I crouched down, lifted the white tablecloth, and my eyes scanned the dark space under the table. The little paper was lying next to his chair, a harmless object, but full of menace. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the world shrink around me, leaving only Noah, me, and that damned paper. I unfolded it. The candlelight was enough to read the scribbled words. "Table 8. Add crushed walnuts to the child's ice cream." A few words, but they were like an electric shock that ran through my entire body. I subconsciously crumpled the paper in my hand. The music, the laughter, everything around me seemed to sink into an abyss from which I couldn't escape. Serafina, in her dazzling wedding dress, continued to laugh in a corner of the hall, raising her glass to toast with a guest, as if nothing in the world could worry her. Julian was busy taking photos with his fellow musicians with a radiant smile that seemed to confirm that this was the happiest day of his life. But for me, everything in that conservatory was a farce, a curtain that hid the terrible truth I had just discovered. I squeezed the paper tightly, feeling it burn my skin. Noah, the grandson I loved more than my own life, had almost become the victim of an evil plot, right on his father's wedding day. I turned to Grace, who was sitting next to Noah. Her eyes were filled with concern when she saw my expression. "Take care of Noah, please," I said, trying to stay calm, although I knew I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. Grace nodded, pulling Noah closer to her and hugging him tightly, like a protective shield. "Where are you going?" she asked me in a low voice, but full of anguish. I just shook my head without answering because I didn't even know what I was going to do next. I quickly went out into the hallway, my legs heavy, as if they were carrying lead, but with my heart pounding, urging me to act. Near the bar, I saw a group of waiters chatting. Their laughter sounded like a painful contrast to the storm that was raging inside me. I recognized Thomas, the young man who had brought the food to our table several times. He had a kind face and a friendly smile, but at that moment, I couldn't think about that. I walked straight up to him, put the paper in his face, and asked in a firm voice, "Do you know who sent this paper?" Thomas looked at the paper and his face changed instantly. His carefree smile turned into an expression of panic. "My God, this is my paper," he stammered, his hands trembling as if he wanted to snatch it from me. "A woman gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray." His words were like a ray of light in the midst of confusion, but they also agitated me even more. "Who gave it to you?" I insisted, almost shouting, completely losing my composure. Thomas took a step back, confused. "I don't know her name, ma'am. She just told me to give it to the chef. The paper didn't say who sent it." Rage exploded inside me like a burning fire. "All the more reason," I said, getting closer, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "You know, my grandson is severely allergic to walnuts. A single piece could kill him." Thomas turned pale, his eyes wide with horror, and shook his head frantically. "Ma'am, I really didn't know. I just followed the note. I had no idea about anything." His voice broke as if he too was trapped in this nightmare. The other waiters began to whisper among themselves, looking at each other with curiosity and concern. I squeezed the paper in my hand, feeling it burn my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break everything. but I knew I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. Noah was waiting for me, and I had to protect him. From inside the conservatory, the MC's voice cheerfully announced that they should get ready for the main course. His voice was like a cruel reminder that time was running out, and if I hesitated, a deadly trap could be waiting for Noah. I took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in my body. I knew I couldn't stay silent. If I didn't act right now, I would never forgive myself. I returned to the conservatory with the paper still in my hand as irrefutable proof of a sinister plan. The hall was still flooded with candlelight, and the music of the string trio mixed with the laughter of the guests. The waiters silently served the main courses, and the aroma of roasted lamb and gravy filled the air. But for me, everything was a farce. I looked at Noah, huddled next to Grace, his clear eyes full of fear fixed on me as if I were his only refuge in the middle of the storm. I took Noah's little hand, feeling his trembling fingers in my palm. And then, as if driven by an invisible force, I stood up abruptly. My voice resonated clearly and firmly above the music and conversations. "One moment, please. Before we begin to eat, I have something to clarify." The whole hall fell silent, as if time had stopped. All eyes were on table 8, where I was standing with Noah by my side, and Grace sitting with a spark of determination in her eyes. The clinking of glasses ceased, the murmurs died down, and I could only hear the pounding of my heart in my chest. I held up the paper. The words scribbled on it were an undeniable accusation. "Who wrote this paper asking for walnuts to be added to the food of the child at table 8? I asked, my voice trembling with indignation, but forcing it to be clear and sharp. Whispers began to be heard like small waves in a calm lake. Some guests looked at each other, shaking their heads with looks of curiosity and confusion. I felt Noah's gaze fixed on me, as if he were begging me to do something to protect him. Julian ran from another table with a smile on his face that quickly turned to concern when he saw my expression. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, completely bewildered. I didn't answer him immediately. I just put the paper on the table and pushed it towards him. "Read it yourself," I said in a harsh voice, although inside I was a mess. Julian took the paper. His eyes scanned the words, and I saw his face turned pale and his hands tremble slightly. "What does this mean?" he asked, stunned, looking at me and then at Noah, as if searching for a logical explanation. Serafina, in her dazzling wedding dress, approached, frowning with a perfectly feigned surprise. "What is all this? Some kind of bad joke?" she said in a soft voice, but I noticed a flash of panic in her eyes. I looked at her directly in the eyes, my heart gripped by anger and fear. "My grandson is allergic to walnuts," I said, my voice trembling with indignation. "This is not a joke. This is an attempt at murder." My words fell like thunder, plunging the hall into a deathly silence. Some guests' mouths dropped open in astonishment, while others began to whisper, their eyes moving from me to Serafina. Serafina let out a forced laugh, a mask to maintain her composure. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vance, but there is no name on the paper." "Are you going to believe a story that a child who found it made up?" she said with a mocking tone, trying to make me look like a paranoid old woman. Some guests began to comment doubtfully. "Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Who would do something like that at a wedding?" The blood boiled in my veins. Serafina's audacity left me almost speechless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear off that wedding dress to reveal the truth. But I knew I had to remain calm for Noah, for my family. Suddenly, Grace stood up, hugging Noah tightly. Her eyes reddened and fixed on Serafina. "That's enough, Serafina." Her voice sounded cold but full of pain, as if she couldn't contain herself any longer. Grace stepped forward and slapped her, a smack that echoed throughout the hall. The dry, resounding sound broke the silence and the falsehood. Everyone froze, including me. Serafina put a hand to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock, and then turned to Julian, sobbing. "You see, she's crazy with jealousy, and that's why she's attacking me. What have I done to deserve this?" Grace didn't back down, her fists clenched and her voice broken with rage. "The only wicked person here is you. You wanted to harm an innocent child at your own wedding?" Her words were like a knife that cut through the heavy air of the hall. The looks of doubt began to center on Serafina, and I saw her freeze, her false smile fading. Julian was motionless. His gaze went from me to Grace and Serafina, as if he were trapped between two worlds. "Grace, calm down," he said in a trembling voice, but I knew he was no longer sure who to believe. The murmurs of the guests grew like a tide that carried all eyes toward me, toward Serafina and toward Noah, my little grandson, who was trembling in Grace's arms. Serafina tried to maintain her false calm, but I saw her hands shake when she spoke. "This is a slander. I'm sure someone put that paper there to ruin our wedding." Her voice was sharp, but I noticed the panic in her eyes, as if her perfect mask was starting to crack. I couldn't stand her audacity anymore. The anger inside me exploded like a fire that consumed all my patience. I hit the table hard, making the glasses shake. "That's enough," I shouted in a voice so cold that it silenced even the music of the string trio. "Thomas, come here." The young waiter, Thomas, approached from a corner, his face pale with fear. His eyes darted from side to side as if he were trapped between the truth and the storm that was coming. I showed him the paper, my voice trembling but firm. "Confirm it. Is this the paper you received?" Thomas nodded repeatedly, stammering, "Yes, ma'am, it is. A woman from the other table gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray." He lowered his head as if he wanted to avoid my gaze. I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm because I knew everyone in the hall was watching. Serafina hurried to interrupt in a sharp, almost desperate voice. "You're mistaken. I don't know anything about that." But before she could respond, a weak voice full of pain was heard from behind. Olivia, Serafina's younger sister, burst into tears and stood up from her chair. "It was my sister, Serafina, who gave me that paper," the young woman said, trembling as tears ran down her cheeks. "She asked me to give it to the waiter. I swear I didn't know what was inside." A murmur of astonishment ran through the hall. "My God, I can't believe it. How is that possible?" I looked at Olivia and my heart softened. She was barely 18 years old. Her eyes were red and full of confusion, as if she too was trapped in this nightmare. Serafina turned abruptly and yelled at her sister, her face disfigured with anger. "Shut up, Olivia. How dare you make up lies to harm your own sister?" Her voice was sharp, but I saw her lips tremble as if she were struggling to hide the truth. Olivia backed away, trembling from head to foot, and said between sobs, "I'm not lying, sister. I just did what you asked." Her words were like a dagger that went through Serafina's falsehood, leaving the entire hall in a state of shock. A close older relative shook his head, his voice choked. "How is it possible to not even spare an innocent child?" In the midst of the chaos, Grace stepped forward, hugging Noah tightly, and said in an icy voice, "If you keep denying it, we can ask to check the security cameras in the hall. Everything will be cleared up in a moment." Her words were like a stone thrown into a lake, causing waves of panic. Serafina's face turned ashen, her lips tightened, and her gaze desperately sought an escape. But there was no escape now. She didn't say another word, and that silence, for me, was the clearest confession of all. Julian froze, his hand trembling on Noah's shoulder, looking in horror at the woman he had just called his wife, Serafina. His voice broke as if he were trying to cling to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding, but his gaze, moving from the paper to Noah, said it all. I saw how his heart broke, just like mine had when he discovered the plot. An uncle stood up and shook his head, disgusted. "It's unbelievable. Such wickedness on a day of celebration." His voice trembled as if he were holding back his indignation. After Grace's challenge about the security cameras, a deadly silence took over the hall. Serafina, the woman I once tried to accept as part of my family, stood there, her face pale and her lips pressed together, looking for one last excuse. But the truth was exposed, and she had nowhere left to run. Julian, my son, walked slowly toward her, his face tense and his eyes red, and asked her, "Serafina, tell me the truth. Is it true?" His voice trembled as if he were begging for a glimmer of hope that it was all a mistake. But I knew that deep down he also felt the painful truth. Serafina took a step back, trying to force a twisted smile, but her eyes betrayed her panic. "You don't believe me?" she said in a broken voice, as if trying to cling to the last drop of Julian's trust. "It's all their plan. I didn't do anything." But her words sounded weak, like a wind about to die out before a storm. I looked at her, my heart heavy with indignation and pain. This woman, I thought would bring my son happiness, was now standing in front of me like a stranger, a danger I hadn't seen before. Grace put a hand on Julian's shoulder and said in a voice she was holding back with all her might, "Noah almost died because of this woman." Her words were as sharp as a knife. Serafina yelled desperately, "Shut up! You're just a jealous intruder!" But Grace didn't move. She was trembling with rage, but stood firm like a shield for Noah. "How dare you call me jealous?" Grace responded in an icy voice. "Look this child in the eyes and tell me you didn't try to hurt him." Noah clung to me, his little hands squeezing mine as if he feared being dragged into that nightmare. The guests began to stand up. The festive atmosphere had completely broken. A relative of our family, Mr. Johnson, hit the table with anger. "This is a disgrace. We can't tolerate this." I saw Julian's face harden. The last trace of doubt vanished. He turned to Serafina, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Get out," he said. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of a final judgment. Security guards approached, and without another word, Serafina was escorted out of the conservatory, her perfect dress now a symbol of her deception. Julian fell to his knees in front of Noah, his face buried in his hands. "Forgive me, son," he sobbed. "Forgive me for not seeing. Forgive me for not protecting you." I went to him, putting my arms around both my son and my grandson. In the ruins of what should have been a happy day, our real family was all that remained.